So basically now you have your boilers all full of warm, well, at least hot, warm water. Your tender has fuel in it. Your tender will have water in it because you were pumping water into it about the same time as you were cooking it in as we were cooking it in the bomb, anything like that. Um, so you're about ready to fire up. Well, on a solid fuel locomotive, it's firing up the same as usual. On oil fired locomotives, it's almost the same as usual. Everybody has different fire procedures for any of the locomotives, any of their places, so I'm not going to go over that right here. Um, and realistically speaking, you start going through your startup procedure. One of the other things you'll have to watch out for within your startup procedure is to have a wrench with you. Why would that be important? Because every valve is going to leak. All the packings were tightened up for warm temperature operation. And again, like I said, with the metal contracting for the lower temperature, all those dimensions are just enough different that you're going to have steam leaking out of every orifice, literally. So you're going to be tightening up valves as steam starts rising in the boiler. For lubrication and things like that, you're going to have watch out for the low temperature semi-solidity of your oil. It's not that big of a deal once you get the boiler up to a reasonable temperature. It's going to start, cooking itself. Now that sounds like a bad thing, but it's in this case it's actually a good thing. It'd be warming the oil that's on the oil shelf. If you have an oil shed, putting a heater in there a couple of days ahead of time would not be untoward. Just make sure it's shielded and not likely to set the shed on fire. Things like that. We've all seen wintertime operations where steam is just leaking out all over, and the engineer and fireman probably can't even see their gauges from all the steam in the cap. That's because they didn't tighten up any of the glands. And this is one of the conundrums with winter operations, is if you set up for cold weather and you only run like twice during the cold weather, you have to undo everything you did while operating before you lay up the locomotive. You're going to have to untighten every gland up that you tightened in order so that it's not over tight for normal operation during 60, 70, 80-degree weather. This is a common occurrence. This is a known issue. So while you're doing that, yeah, it's going to take longer to start up. It's going to take longer to track down all the leaks. It's going to take longer to make sure everything's working. But that's one of the things that you have to do. So eventually you're going to get down to one of the last things that you do is tightening up the steam glands on the valve stem, on the cylinder packing, all that sort of stuff. And why you do that last is because, well, you want to make sure you're not get it too tight. So you want it steam tight. Pardon me. You want it steam tight, but you don't want it to be impeding motion. Because again, every bearing on the train is going to be stiff because it's cold. Every bearing on the locomotive even starting out is going to be stiff because it's cold. Well, how do you address that? The easy way is you don't. As the friction occurs, the bearing will naturally heat up and the oil that's for that bearing will naturally start flowing because the warmer temperature of the bearing. Yeah, you'll run a little hot, but welcome to reality. And it won't run hot because the external temperature will keep the bearing from literally roaching itself most of the time. There are some circumstances where this is not the case. However, those are exceptional, and so I'm not going to discuss it here. Maybe in a story. But so there you go. You have it up in operations. Well, that gets onto the train. Okay, well, what do we do about that? If the cars are steam heated, oh, that's its own fun nightmare. Because the steam connection glad hands are, at the best of times, a pain in the butt. During winter season, at least one will fail. And it gets really fun when you're kneeling in if it's just snow, you're fine. If it's ice, even better. If it's slop, God help you. And that's part of where I froze my hands, because you can't really manipulate small parts with thick gloves on or with brakeman's mitts, anything like that. So you have to use your actual hands. And even if you have those little stretchy gloves like women like to use, that ain't going to do very much to help you. You'd still get cold. Everything is still going to have water dripped on it or slush near it or take your pick. Gets really fun in a really big hurry, and by fun I mean the sarcastic version of fun. The condensate drains on the cars. One of those will likely freeze up during winter operations. So you have to keep steam on them the whole time you want them in operation, and then blow everything out before it gets cold after you're done with the operations. Things like that. And then you have the regulator for the steam heat in the cab. Yay! These things have not been operated for, say, 300 days out of the year, and now you're expecting it to work. That does not necessarily happen. So smacking it with the back end of the wrench sometimes gets those things to work. There's various issues with them. Take them apart, put them back together. Depends what kind you have. Yada, yada. So eventually you have steam heat in the cars if your cars have steam heat. Otherwise, you're dealing with coal stoves, which are very easy to deal with, or Baker heaters, which are more interesting to deal with. Long story short, on a Baker heater it's a hydronic hot water system that circulates by its own convection current. And if they work well, they work wonderfully. If they don't work well, my grandfather had an interesting phrase. It's enough to make a preacher swear. So we'll just leave that at that. So this is a preparation for snow train service for wintertime operations on a steam railroad in about a third of the United States, where we get feet of snow over winter instead of a little dusting like Lawrie did recently in East Anglia. This is not to say it's the same as Heiss has out in Colorado. No, they get more snow than us. And we get a little more colder temperatures, I do believe, because on this end of the Great Plains, I'm near the Great Lakes. This end of the Great Plains, it has a whole lot of territory to refrigerate itself over, even after it's come down off of his mountains. So there is that. But every place has its own operational challenges. Wintertime up here, summertime in the swamps of the south. Rocky Mountains has its own issues with piling snow high. No matter where you're railroading, there's going to be something that's not so great at some time in the year. But this one's ours. And I like it. In a future episode, I'm going to tell you a nice little story about what happens after you get everything all set up and have cost more than a few words to send you to Hades and back. But that'll be for next time. Thank you, folks, and I hope you had a good holidays. And let me know if you want to hear more on me like this, or if you want regular content again. Have a good day, and like, subscribe, share, comment, even if you're irritated. And eventually I will get a support link up at some point. Thank you, folks, and see you around.